It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstine Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial complex in all of its urban sprawl. How you doing today, Steve?
Urban sprawl. What if it's suburban sprawl? Is that
That's what urban sprawl is, Steve?
well, I mean, but couldn't the suburban sprawl being sprawl into the country?
Well, that's exurbs.
The exurbs.
Yes.
I guess you're right. And yeah, okay.
I mean, it depends where. It just depends on.
No, you're right. That is
matters
the
of
right term
degree,
for it.
right? That's all. So everything is spawned from the urban sprawl. Well, actually, you could make a case if you really go back thousands of years that reverse. There's trends, but anyway, that's really macro. But if you consider that if you consider like the city suburbs exurbs trajectory, then it would be called that. But you could probably more practical and more modern interpretation would be you would call it suburban sprawl.
Yeah. I mean, because urban sprawl would be, the downtown feel, downtown congestion and density spreading out, whereas suburban sprawl would be, less dense spreading into farmland, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. Right. It's just a matter of where you want to start on the spectrum.
And either way, it's totally irrelevant because that was just your dumb intro and this off the top of your head.
Yeah. It came to me in 2 seconds. I thought about as the topics we cover, become exurbs.
Now, you told me right before we went on the air that you were going to a show. Is this something you care to disclose? Is it a good show or is this just some private thing?
I would say it's actually in between those poles. So it's not something that you would care about, but it's not something that you would necessarily even form an opinion about. It's indie rock. So it is so indie that the headliner
is unknown.
Well, no. So the one of the women's bands is a band called Waxahachie out of North Carolina. They're kind of an alternative country rock, indie rock vibe, whatever. So in that strain of music, and she's fairly well known in what she does, and I think she might have been nominated for an Emmy and whatever. She's got a mid-level career in the music industry. Like she doesn't have a day job and she tours regularly, blah blah blah. So she has a twin sister and they started a band. So the headliner is the sub band of the already, middle class at best band.
Is the twin an identical
And I'm going
twin?
for the opener.
Is the twin an identical twin?
I believe so.
See, that's going to look weird because you're going to see the one lady come out and then the same lady come back out under a different band singing different songs, or so it appears.
And she was in like the original like garage band versions of the band and hasn't done it for 10 or 12 years now. The main chick has been around for a while. I mean, she has a career is how I describe it. But the guy I'm going to see, I couldn't get into 3 shows he played in a small club over the weekend. And his shows, I even priced his shows in Philadelphia and DC, and they were going for $500 to $600 on the secondary market. So this guy's white hot.
But he's the third billing on a.
He's a second billing. He's a second billing.
Well, yes. But if it's the identical twin and then the other twin, and then
they're together though. They're together.
Oh, they're together.
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So
the band is the Snow Caps, if you want to follow that at home, and Ryan Davis and the Roadhouse Band.
There you go. Do you have any thoughts about George Strait and Kiss being inducted into the, getting the Medal of Freedom or the Kennedy Center honors? What was it? I had a friend who was there at the whatever ceremony it was. He kept sending me pictures.
You take honors any way you can get them, I guess. It is could not be more Kiss. That's how I put it.
So it's Kennedy Center honors what it is. Yeah, it's I think the whole thing's dumb personally, but what is the Kennedy Center honor and how are they picking these people? I mean, sure, I'm all for I'm pro Kiss. I'm pro Kiss getting an honor, and I get maybe this is like they're they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but barely, and so maybe this is kind of a makeup date for this from the president, I guess. It's just very odd. I just find it very odd that Gene Simmons and Donald Trump are in the same room. That's all.
Oh, that I don't find that odd. Um,
You don't? I don't know. It just seems very odd to me.
Not Gene Simmons as an individual. I mean, he's fairly right wing, first of all. Uh,
Yeah. Oh, I know that. Yeah, yeah. That's probably why
so
he's
I'm just
getting
saying
it.
politically,
I
although
didn't
both
mean.
him and Paul Stanley have actually bashed Trump in the past. So
Yeah, but
that
he's
was
not like
interesting.
a flaming liberal. Way off the.
Who, Paul
Clearly.
Stanley?
No,
Yeah,
no.
no, no.
Simmons.
No,
Simmons
Simmons
is.
is a fairly, what maybe, I mean, these things change, definitions change so much, but he was a very Reagan era
Right.
hardcore conservative, Gene Simmons.
And George Strait is a country singer from Texas. I'm sure he's probably
Yeah.
fairly
Uh,
conservative.
you could probably, well, I'm not a bit, I actually, and I'm fairly conversant in country music, although not pop country. George Strait's never been one of my faves at all,
Me
but you could
neither.
probably make a case. You could probably make a case that his career is a little bit more worthy of Kiss if you think about just artistic output. But that's actually, I don't know. I would
I
really want to
think
make that
Kiss
case.
is chronically underrated a little bit, and because they're so their image is so silly, that I think they get underrated by a lot of people. Like
I'm
for example, I don't
very,
want.
I'm very pro Kiss, so I didn't want to even to sound like I was negative about it.
No,
I
I
was just
know
saying,
you're not. I'm just saying that's what the people are. And like for example, like I heard who Eddie Trunk is, the
yeah,
podcaster. So he read a Billboard top 50 rock bands of all time list. Billboard came out with Kiss is not in the top 50, which is crazy because they've sold a ton of albums. They've been around for 50 years. They're worthy of a spot. They had a ton of influence. Yes, it's outrageous, but that's the kind of thing that they typically get disrespected on.
I agree, and I actually agree. I probably even agree more because I think that the spectacle, the image making,
It is rock and roll.
it 100%. Like so, like I don't think I say you're doing a disservice to Kiss if you decouple that, and then the strength of both sides of the house, so to speak, should easily get them in those kind of top
Yeah.
50 lists.
Now
Because
I'm
I
not.
think the and their ability, yeah. So I think that's ridiculous, and I do think they had the chops, like especially a lot of these artists that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You're judging that on 3 to 5 releases. You're not judging that on a full career trajectory, and I think on that metric, Kiss holds up very strong.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the early days like others are. I didn't grow up with it, and I think musically they're not up. They're not technicians, as others. But I think it's anybody's denying their influence on music is crazy, especially the spectacle of it and the staging. And they invented the the big flashing sign and the pyro and all that. So it's just disrespectful. So I'd like to think that this Kennedy Center honor thing with Kiss is somehow a make good for all of that disrespect. Even though again, I'm not the hugest Kiss fan in the world.
Yeah, my point was just like if you looked at the metrics for career
50
achievements.
years of how many albums have they sold, and how many albums do they have, and sold out shows and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, George Strait has more typical
Oh
country
yeah.
accolades and than they do.
Yeah, even though I
Um,
couldn't name a George Strait song,
no,
but yes,
I'm not a fan of George Strait. I'm a
it's just not my.
exponentially more fan of Kiss. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, me too. It's just not my thing, but you can't deny his influence.
I mean, here's what I'll say. The last thing I'll say about Kiss. One of my favorite all time. I mean, if you did, all time is tough, but like punk adjacent genre bands of all time, and then maybe in my top 20 is the New York Dolls. And they were playing the same clubs as in Queens, cutting their teeth as Kiss was, basically doing the same kind of shock and all, developing the same kind of shock and all stage presence. So New York Dolls dressed up as women famously, so had like a very like crazy over the top glam vibe, and they were like I said, they were cutting their teeth in the same rock clubs in Queens in the mid '70s,
Well,
or late '60s, early '70s.
there wouldn't be 80s hair bands without the New York Dolls.
No,
People
not
don't
at all.
understand the massive influence that
Johnny
New York
Thunders
Dolls had.
taught Poison. Johnny Thunders
Yes.
walked so Poison could run.
And Motley.
Yeah, but yeah, that maybe even that's a better even example because Poison is using a sort of second generation Motley Crue, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've driven. One person I know we've driven away is our number one fan, my brother-in-law, who
He
has
doesn't like
listened
any
to
of
every
this.
episode. Is cataloged in his Spotify Wrapped podcast edition, which he sent me a documentation of. But his persistent critique is there's too much music talk at the beginning.
Here I bring up, I bring it up and ruin the first 10 minutes for him. Sorry,
Right. All right.
brother-in-law.
Yeah, sorry, Joe. We'll go ahead and move on. And move on to, well, with the theme of moving on, we'll jump over to Lane Kiffin, who has kind of like thrown a giant stink bomb into the world of college football, which for all the constant stink bombs of college football, it is still a ratings juggernaut and maybe has never been more popular than ever. And I'm more excited than I've ever been about college football in 15 years because my JMU Dukes are about to make the playoffs.
I am. I've never been less excited about college football than right now.
I think
Truthfully,
I'm intellectually on your team.
you're just excited because your team. But yeah,
Yes.
from a macro standpoint, I think you and I are alike on this. Okay, so Lane Kiffin. There's a lot to this. So Lane Kiffin is the head currently today. Maybe still the head. No, actually, well,
Like
we'll
he's in
get to
limbo, right? He's in
yeah,
purgatory right now.
yeah, right. A month ago, Lane Kiffin was the head coach of Ole Miss, which was ended up being 11-1, the best season probably realistically in their history, at least in
Since Archie
decades.
Manning.
Yeah, long time ago. um, and so then Kiffin, who has a reputation of being a jerk, let's just say this, he has
And a
left.
program jumper.
Yes, he's left many things and people in his wake. So then he gets an offer from LSU that, in his view, he can't refuse, which is one thing. But then his plan is to leave Ole Miss in the lurch, not even finish the season, and run over to LSU, which, by the way, is competing with Ole Miss for the SEC. At the time for the SEC championship. And not only does he do that, but then he threatens all of his assistant coaches and says, if you don't come with me now, right now, today, I'm not going to hire you at LSU for next year, which is a really, really slimy thing to do. So then he gets into a giant war with the leadership of Ole Miss, who obviously can't just let him run to the competition at the very, the key part of the season like this. And so now we think he's in limbo, we think. Let's stop there and get your thoughts. Well, I'm going to find the exact status of Lane Kiffin today.
I, well, first of all, this is an important fact. It looks like all reporting, and no one's reading it exactly, but that this contract at LSU is in the neighborhood of $91 million.
It's a crazy amount of money. Yeah.
So I mean, I would challenge any of us to, we would all be scraping layers of egg off our faces and broken hearts and minds behind us for $91 million. So
yeah, but I mean, come on, but go ahead. Sorry.
I would hope that I would not, right? So I'm willing to be on Moral Island, but it is an important fact just to throw out here. 91 million, right, is the prime motivator.
It's a lot.
No, this guy,
but he has
Lane
a lot
Kiffin's
of money.
The worst.
Just
He's
for
the
the
worst.
record.
And
can I interrupt real quick? So,
yeah.
Okay, I think he is, for the record, no longer the head coach of Ole Miss today. But go ahead.
Right, he can't get they have canceled his key fob.
Right. Yes, but go ahead.
No, I just think no one looks good on this. But at the same time, I even have a pinch of empathy for Lane Kiffin here because that is how culpable, for blame, and idiotic the NCAA is for allowing this kind of system to happen. It's like that there is actually no way this won't happen because the way that the system demands it. And it's like you want to ruin your own sport. That's the only explanation I have at this point because these are simple fixes that make the playing field equal and protect your season, protect your cash cow, protect the product.
You just said the key point though, which is really where I want to go with this. Because Lane Kiffin's a jerk. I personally, I don't think I could do what he did, but I get it, $91 million. But the bigger question is, what is the fix? Okay, so then you have a couple things. You could hope that everybody learns their lesson. And like, if you gave me this contract, I'm an attorney, licensed attorney, I could write a contract that could prevent this. Basically you put, you say, if he leaves, if he voluntarily terminates or somehow defaults in a contract, there's a payback. There's a provision wherein he has to pay back some money. It's some significant amount of money that would keep 99% of people from leaving. That's step one. And so you could hope that people do that on their own. Now, would big time coaches agree to that? Another story. Two, you could get the NCAA to pass a rule that say, no voluntary coaching changes, until after the season. That comes with its own perils, because what if somebody, gets in trouble, gets a DUI, gets in criminal trouble, you have to let them go. You have to have exceptions to that. Or three, you could beg Congress for help, which is we're going to get into here and associate this with this SCORE Act that's dying. So there's different fixes. So what do you see as a fix?
I just
none of
think
those are great
you just have
ideas.
to map out the rhythm of your season in a way that makes sense. So the thing that the prime mover here is that which we've talked about and follows the same problems, and could all be collectively fixed with some half a brain. The transfer portal for the students being open so early, for the athletes being open so early, is the prime driver for all of these problems, because that creates the false sense
Yes.
of urgency
We've talked
about,
about
well, I
this
got to
a lot.
get, if we don't have the coach, then we had to be recruited in the portal, blah, so that's what's driving the frenzy. So one, you just have to make it where that you let your season play out. You do what the NFL does. You say this is the, when it starts, when it ends, what the legal tampering periods are. You could bake all of that in. So you have to make the transfer portal for the athletes come, like start the day after. You can even have it where basically a lot of the shenanigans is still going to happen, but you have. And then that allows you erase the sense of urgency for getting the coaching carousel, because the coaching carousel was happening when LSU fired Brian Kelly. What was that, like 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point? So
Yes.
so this is just insane. They're who even knew what, they didn't even have the rankings for the playoffs active yet. So I think you have to fix all of that. And with so you have the excuses of, well, there's no collective bargaining, there's no whatever, how do we pay? All of that is the false excuse they use on the player portal. You don't even have that with the coaches. You don't even have that with the coaches, right? Because they're obviously employees, right? So I agree with all the things you said, which I think are all part of the same solution package. But also, you have to have when things are allowed and not allowed. And obviously, having massive flux in players and coaches halfway through your season is something that, how you design anything that gets you in that spot, you get what you ask for. And that's why you have to almost give Lane Kiffin a pass, because he would have been just as scammy if he had signed in the first hour of the legal eligibility, right? You can still call him a turncoat and scammy, and did he even coach that hard in the playoffs? All that stuff would still be true about Lane Kiffin. But the sport, because that's what it is at this point, the sport would be protecting its product, and their lack of ability to do so is mind-boggling, and they don't seem to pay a price.
Well, first of all, the idea that you said they designed the legal tampering period, I would argue they didn't design anything. They just did, they just.
Well, I'm saying they could at least having it.
So I think what I'm hearing you say for all that is that the real long-term answer here would be that you fix the transfer portal, and so that eliminates the need to do things like hire these coaches in November and ruin another season.
You're not getting a running start on next season on October 10th.
Yeah, which makes some sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And then your idea about the contract is the poison pill, right? That's what's like really like,
basically a poison pill in the contract. You default by leaving, then you're going to pay back a humongous amount of money.
Because people always try to exploit the rules, right? So even if you had that, like, okay, no one can talk about anything until the Monday after the championship game, or whatever, it's championship game's on a Monday, whatever, the Wednesday after the championship game, all the portals and movement things open, you'd still have lots of people gaming that. That's just human nature. So the poison pill there is then, okay, if you really do that, then here's the escalator on the finances.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to have a way to fire coaches. Again, what if somebody, rapes somebody or, gets a DUI, you
Yeah,
have
but
to
you
have
can
a way to
have
get rid of.
they all have. I mean, they all
Yeah.
have
Well, that's a
conduct
default. That's going
clauses.
to be a conduct, right? That's going to be a
Yeah.
conduct clause. So you have to have that. But what I'm saying is, in what we're both saying here, is you could write these contracts to disallow what we're talking about. And so you combine that with fixing the transfer. And by fixing the transfer portal, as we've talked about many times, in my eyes, means you accept a contract from a team or from a school rather, in absence of things like conduct. You cannot leave for 2 seasons.
And if you're getting paid, then you have a buy. There's buyouts there too. The same,
Yes.
the same accelerator. So if the quarterback says, I don't, screw Kansas, I'm going to UCLA next year, then there's clawbacks in that NIL
Yes.
money.
Right. Now that's a little harder because NL money are theoretically, contracts that aren't between the university and the player. They're between a private entity and the player. And so, you have clawbacks, but how do you regulate that when the university itself isn't a party to it? And so the answer though is really comes in what got tanked as a result of Kiffin, which is the SCORE Act. We talked about SCORE Act a couple months ago, and the SCORE Act basically was the NCAA lobbyist response to the House case, which was the lawsuit between the student athletes, against the NCAA to allow them to make money. And so the SCORE Act was something that basically was going to be an act of Congress that said students can't be employees, which is important. And then it regulated a lot of the NIL money. Well, that act apparently has died because of political garbage in Congress recently. But part of the political garbage was that the Lane Kiffin saga caused a lot of consternation amongst our lawmakers. So this is related to that. But it sounds like what you could do, I think, to your point, is in something like the SCORE Act, require some type of poison pill type thing in NIL contracts. If you're going to pass a congressional law, let's go all the way. I'm not necessarily for a congressional intervention, but if you are, let's fix it. I think that's how to do it, because otherwise you can't, or have the NCAA regulate and say any contract has to have some kind of poison pill in it. But I don't know how. I mean, I think tortious interference with the contract is the problem.
The fact that the NCAA can't find 8 to 10 smart people that they lock. I mean, this is going to sound silly, but I actually don't think it is. They lock however the NCAA basketball tourney committee, they lock those people in a room and they parse out a whole crazy system of metrics and evaluations to get to whatever it is, 68, whatever the 64 is colloquial at this point. It's not the real number. The field of 64. You someone tell me you can't find 8 to 10 of the smartest people when there's billions with a B, kissing trillions with a T level of profit to get around a table and figure out a way to make this work. And what is obvious to me, their kind of middle to long term strategy is just, saying to the federal government at some point, "Daddy, help me." It's pathetic. It's pathetic. And so I actually agree with you. If it goes to the feds, then yeah, you should then lock it in. But I don't see that really happening on a whole number of
I don't
reasons.
think you need it to happen either.
But that's my point. Like, but
Yeah.
that's what it's the NCAA's
Are we
goal.
agreeing about politics again? I'm downright frightened by this, Chris.
No, we would probably agree. We would probably have differing opinions on how much leeway Congress should have about regulating anything, and then if
Right.
they think about this as an industry, then they have a role to play. But what I find pathetic is the NCAA blowing through all of their agency, their own ability to self-govern,
Well,
and basically give
you
up
bring
the
up
rights.
you bring up the turn, for example, the tournament, they can find the 68 best teams, but that's not the same thing as regulating the college
No, of
sports
course not.
industry.
I'm
Okay,
saying, but like this idea that you can't,
they
but
haven't
it's the
had
same
any
process at different scale.
but they haven't shown any ability to do that for literally decades. And
Fair.
fundamentally, the problem is they've allowed themselves to be ruled by the commissioners of the Power Five conferences forever, who have consistently acted solely in their own best interests, not in the interest of the NCAA or anything. Fundamentally, I think that's a problem. And, and the leadership of the NCAA has always been weak, positionally weak, and kowtows to the Power Five, and so that's the fundamental problem, I think.
Interesting.
Not that they couldn't find 8 smart people to fix it. They just lacked the political chutzpah to do it.
Fair. I think it's the same thing. What's really fascinating to me is that this is actually a pretty big macro political question, because what is the truth here is, especially if you look at, let's look at this. You have to talk about everything here as with the Southeast Conference, the SEC, as really the elephant in any room here. But this is so macro political because these giant universities and the sports complexes that they output are massive industries in those states. So this is just old school pork politics.
I don't know if everybody understands that.
The senators and the Congress people, the people that represent those states in the federal government, just like if they came from Steeltown, USA, or Lumber USA, or Car USA, any of these big industries that are very region and state specific, oil in Texas, etc., then those industries, their representatives, I don't care what color jersey they wear, those representatives representing those interests is one of their main jobs. And it's the same. So you go to SEC conferences where these big state schools, that industry is just like steel, cars, and oil.
Absolutely. Not only that, but some of these congressmen are going to be boosters from the universities.
Right. I'm not even factoring in the emotional connections.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, there's that as too, because sure. Yeah. The Pennsylvania, congressional delegation represents the steel industry, but I bet you there's several Penn State grads among there. And so there's a bigger emotional connection.
And the industry of Penn State may be more important to the state of Pennsylvania at this point than steel.
Maybe. Yeah, certainly that's the case in some states,
it's a statewide system too. I mean, it's basically Penn College Station is, where is the main campus and everyone knows it, blah, blah, blah. But like Penn State basically runs the entire big state, Pennsylvania, entire state higher ed institution.
So I think that in this story, several things are true at once. One, Lane Kiffin was a jerk about this. Like you could leave contractually.
Insert whatever story you want, and that maxim remains true.
Well, it's true. Okay, yeah. Fair enough. But in this case, Kiffin sure could leave, but he didn't have to threaten his coaching staff on the way out. That was totally unnecessary. The NCAA is at fault for the reasons we suggested. Congress thought they were stepping in and got, stepped on a political football. As it turns out, the SCORE Act, they thought they had enough votes, and then some of the Democratic delegation in the House representatives backed out, and as did a few Republicans, and so it's basically dead. So that's at fault too. How do you fix it? Like we said, one, universities need to draft contracts that prevent this, or at least disincentivize this. Two, the NCAA needs to correct itself, which is a much, much bigger issue. How you drive the influence of the Power Five down in favor of a not a toothless NCAA commissioner is a whole other question. And then the very last resort ought to be congressional intervention. Just I think we don't need the Congress to fix everything. It's kind of gross.
I mean, my JMU Dukes are going through the exact same thing, and they're about to crack the playoffs, which is kind of insane from a sports perspective. But their coach is on their way out the door to UCLA, and you can imagine any number of players and coaches are going to follow him from Harrisonburg, Virginia, to UCLA.
Did he threaten the coaches on the way out, though?
No, and he's committed to. And school has committed to him to coach through the end of the season. So they found a different path forward.
On the other hand, though, UCLA is not JMU's primary rival, or one of their primary rivals. Right.
They're not even in the same, remotely the same conference.
In the case of Kiffin, he's going to one of Ole Miss's primary rivals.
Well, that's the top. The SEC is the top level of the sport. I mean, no programs like Notre Dame and Penn State are struggling to find coaches.
But it'd be one thing for Kiffin to go from Ole Miss to Ohio State.
Yeah, right. At least go to the Big Ten or whatever they call themselves.
Yes, exactly. It's like, the Harvard guy going to Yale, Army guy going to Navy. And that is what's happened here. And and it's exacerbated by the fact that Kiffin has a terrible reputation as a person, for stuff like this going back years and years and years. So it's exacerbated, I think, by that.
He becomes an interesting flashpoint poster boy for this issue where if it was some boring, more under the radar coach, it would be a less of a story.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't want to not cite a story here. In terms of the Kiffin and the ties to the Score Act business, and we need to move on, I know, but Yahoo Sports has a story called Lane Kiffin's Disastrous Exit from Ole Miss Spells a Much Deeper Problem in College Football by Dan Wolken, dated December 1st. And this story goes into a lot of the connections that we're talking about.
So, next big story, which is a kind of a massive, you could file this one in any different sections of the paper: front page, business page, sports page, entertainment page. In fact, I think as just a pure business story is probably its most important implications, and that is, which is just a few days old as we record this on Sunday. I think it broke Friday night or maybe Saturday. Is that after a bunch of different companies and wrangling, Netflix is going to purchase, it's been under a million different names, but the Warner Discovery company, which is basically all of the cable channels, the CNN, the TNTs, that whole cable empire, plus HBO, plus Warner Brothers movie studio, and maybe a couple odds and sods bits from that, is all going to Netflix. We have no idea the implications of this. We can make some guesses. It definitely touches sports while being, way bigger than sports. But just to kind of, if you're concerned about media consolidation, well, one, I don't know, that's me, but maybe we're a dying breed. But the consolidation here is astronomical.
Yeah. First of all, the story is all over the place, but the one I stumbled on first was from the BBC, and I don't think we've ever cited the BBC before here. Netflix to buy Warner Brothers film and streaming business for 72 billion by Rachel Klung, dated looks like 2 days, so the December 5th, which would have been Friday, by the way. So yeah, so this says, to your point, that Netflix has agreed to buy the film and streaming business of Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, Warner Brothers has other things. Warner Brothers has music, off the top of my head, music
They may have
publishing.
sold that. I think that brand and that catalog or whatever wasn't under Zasloff. I think it had already been sold
Oh,
before
okay.
that.
Okay. Well, this is implying that there's other things that are not being sold. The first thing came to my head is music. I hadn't realized they had sold music, but okay. So I think the first thing to talk about here is that there is going to be an antitrust lawsuit about this. There's certainly an antitrust claim. I don't know if there's going to be laws. There's an antitrust analysis, and Congress is going to wring some hands about this. That's number one. Number two is, I think, the more interesting, and we can talk about antitrust. Antitrust basically says that one business can't control the entire business. I would argue off the top of my head that just because Warner Brothers and Netflix merge, that doesn't mean there's not Universal and Disney and a whole bunch of other companies. So I don't know how this is an antitrust problem. And I
Facebook
think,
just won a case a couple weeks ago, which I think even had a worse argument than the media companies, and they just won.
yeah,
They said they're not an antitrust.
I don't, I think antitrust is something that Congress needs to stay out of in many cases. And this is one of them, because it's clearly not, they're not taking the time to. But the more interesting part of this to me is this is what I really want to ask you about. It seems to me that Netflix controlling Warner Brothers is an indication maybe of the future of entertainment. Okay. Now this story does say that Warner Brothers is going to continue to put films, Warner Brothers owned by Netflix is going to continue to put films in theaters. However, Netflix controlling them, I think, tells me that the future isn't necessarily theaters, the future is streaming, which is something that's been going through my head for a while, because it seems like movies have been I don't know, downplayed, marginalized in favor of many streaming platforms. And so that seems to me what this really says to me is that
If you are someone who likes, enjoys, thinks should be vibrant, whatever, blah blah blah, the movie going experience, this is more than dark clouds on the horizon. These are the dark clouds on top of you. Ted Sarandos, the whatever CEO of Netflix, has already said that this is within 24, 48 hours of the ink drying on this. Ted Sanders has already said that, oh yeah, we're going to still give theatrical releases to Warner Brothers Studios, but the release window will be smaller. And so, and if you look at what Netflix does right now with their self-produced movies, like something like the Frankenstein, which is a big tentpole thing, big director, blah blah blah, for Netflix right now. What they do is they give it a very limited run in the theater so that it can check boxes for things it needs to check boxes. That might be a weekend, it might
the
be 2 weekends.
Oscars.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the main one and all the things that transcend from that. But so Ted Sarandos has already said we're going to shorten the release windows for Warner Brothers films. So in 48 hours, they've already signaled a pretty big move.
Well, I got an email from Netflix about this that normally I wouldn't read. I'm going to read some of this because I think it's relevant to this, to what the discussion we're having about this. So this was dated the 6th of December. We recently announced that Netflix will acquire Warner Brothers, including its film and television studios, HBO Max, and HBO. This unites our leading entertainment service with Warner Brothers' iconic stories, bringing some of the world's most beloved franchises like Harry Potter, Friends, The Big Bang Theory, Casablanca, Game of Thrones, and the DC Universe, together with Stranger Things, Wednesday, Squid Game, Bridgerton, and K-pop Demon Hunters. This says nothing is changing today. What I think is interesting about that is, one, I haven't heard of some of these things, but more importantly, there's only two real screen filmed franchises mentioned in this thing: Harry Potter and then the DC Universe, which is sort of a broader topic. Netflix is highlighting HBO. Casablanca is a movie from the 40s.
I think that's there to show that Warner Brothers has a deep IP bench of, basically the history of movies from its
but my
studio.
point is they're not highlighting any current real filmed entertainment, screen theater entertainment. They're highlighting television, old stuff, and series. That's my point.
Yeah, now, do I think they'll slow down production of movies? Not necessarily, but they'll be, dual release. There'll be small window theatrical releases, and then on Netflix or whatever mothership brand or archipelago of brands and access points that this will throw out. But yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. I mean, we just aren't going to know, right? I mean, that's so many different properties, mediums, libraries, IP, that it's gonna take a couple years even to sort some of that stuff out about how they want to do. And in the short term, they don't kind of have to change anything, right? Like, so they can just let HBO Max be HBO Max for a year or two before they figure out what they want to do. They're not in any kind of rush, although doesn't mean I think they'll necessarily be slow about it.
Yeah. Now the connection to sports would be how much more of this sports stuff eventually ends up on Netflix.
Well, it definitely,
or both, Paramount and Netflix.
And it gives them production capabilities. It gives them larger distribution networks for them to go after sports 100%. Now, the Warner Discovery had sort of lost on some sports media rights, most famously being the NBA, which, the NBA on TNT or whatever, that whole franchise. Like, so if Warner Discovery, and they were competing, in fact, that was, a lot of people say, was David Zaslav, beginning of the end, from him, creating this empire, which people thought even a couple of years ago he was one of the big players, and now he's out. And his losing of the NBA and his famous quote about that Warner Discovery didn't need the NBA. Remember that, where they were like saber rattling and Zaslav said, we don't need the NBA. Well, I think it turns out they did. And
clearly they did, because they lost it.
So they don't have a lot. They have some sports properties. They don't have a ton. But now this gives Netflix, after they let the dust settle, it gives them the full arsenal to be more aggressive in sports.
And is it fair to say, I guess, that Netflix is going to all of a sudden be competing with Disney. I mean, Disney has a lot of networks under its command, and now Netflix is going to have a lot of networks under its command.
Well, the players here, and like it makes it sound like they consolidated by one, right? But that is still a massive, right? These are when you're talking about these few, even a move one step is big. But you'll basically have Disney versus Comcast versus Paramount versus Netflix versus Apple and versus Amazon, and even Apple and Amazon in there are more. They're more cousins than siblings, but that'll basically be. Those will be the massive players.
Yeah.
So you really saw just a consolidation of two going into one. But again, that's still huge.
Yes. And that's also, by the way, why this isn't a real antitrust argument. You just named off competition in
that's
every
where
space.
It's going to be clear.
Dumb argument.
Yeah. And like I said, Facebook just won a case where you could make where the competitors to Facebook are way fewer than the ones I just listed for those media.
Well, now, I could name a million antitrust cases that the government lost over the years.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's just one that is very relevant that happened 5 weeks ago, maybe even 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's not. It's realistically isn't an antitrust case. So we'll see what happens to this, but it's certainly very interesting, and I think one, it's consolidation of forces, as you've stated, and two, I think it's just more leaning into streaming and less into theaters than we've ever been.
Yes, most people had already considered Ted Sarandos the enemy of the movie and the theatrical experience, and the enemy's empire just doubled.
Yes. Yeah. The empire took over Tatooine.
Yeah, and related solar systems. So there you go. So that's something to watch, and there'll be all kinds of sports implications that will roll out soon. Like, for instance, you can suddenly watch those Christmas Day games. Is that right? That's Netflix's.
That's Netflix. Yeah, that's Netflix.
So now you'll be able to probably get them through Netflix, obviously, but you'll probably be able to get them through a bunch of those different touch points, which will reach exponentially more people, just like Disney does via Hulu, et cetera, where you can watch all their sports content on 3 different brands. He's very confused.
He's very excited about Netflix and the Netflix Time Warner merger.
Yeah, he has some Netflix stock. The last story we've got is kind of interesting, and this actually is kind of a little bit of a Washington football team related story, because famously the last game that they played on national television, which was the loss to Denver, the horrendous field conditions were on display, but the NFLPA and the NFL corporate have agreed on field standards, which means they obviously knew that their combined cash cow was in danger and fixed the pasture.
Of course, we don't know what these standards are necessarily. They just said they've agreed on something. Okay, so this is Bleacher Report. NFL introduces new field surface standards. All teams must comply with the 2028 season. Kobe's very upset now about this. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, he saw a motorcycle outside is what it was this time. Okay, so there's all kinds of standards right now for the fields. There's turf. There's different types of turf. There's grass. There's different types of grass. There's grass that's removable. Like the stadium I worked on, they could remove it all in big chunks and store it in the back and put it back in there. There's all kinds of things. Now, so this story is quoting Mark Maskey of the Post, by the way. It says the NFL will implement a program next year requiring teams to choose a field service that league spokesman Nick Papa said will come from a library of approved and accredited NFL fields. In other words, they're not going to all of a sudden say every domed stadium needs to figure out how to have grass in it. What they're going to have is, this is the type of grass that's approved. This is the type of turf that's approved. Like, for example, like the Vet in Philadelphia famously had basically like painted concrete. Everybody said that's going to be out. This story cites soccer and saying, there's a bit of hypocrisy to say that they're going to have to switch grass out because of FIFA regulations for the World Cup that's coming up, and then revert back to the crappy artificial turf for the NFL. And so it doesn't say what the standards are, but I think the important thing to note here is it sounds like the days of horrible fields in the NFL are on their way out.
And I'm not a grass, field, turf expert, but I do know that a lot of the players who have talked about this in the last like year or two, last season or two, talk about that there's this hybrid that is kind of like there's a grass turf hybrid that the players prefer. And so I think that actually the science of this has gotten pretty advanced even in the last, chunk of time, 5 or 6 years. So that means I'll probably coalesce around some standard of spectrum around whatever this, it's not artificial turf, it's not grass. There's these hybrid approaches that I think they'll take up. I think the more interesting thing to me is that this obviously must have been a big enough deal, because remember, one of our last couple of shows, we talked about the acrimony, vis-a-vis recently we had both the salaries for the quarterbacks and all that. Plus we had this issue around the NFL being upset about these franchise grades from the players. So they're battling on a number of different fronts. For them to come together this fast, at least from a PR standpoint, and the announcement was fast, and agree on something like this, it means that both sides saw a pretty immediate concern about the quality of the product that is, just paying everybody at these, insane numbers. I mean, we just saw what, Steve, like the highest rated football game ever, basically a regular season game ever with the Chiefs, Dallas on Thanksgiving, I believe.
57 million.
Yeah. So when they come together this fast, to me, that signified that this was an issue.
Well, it's been an issue for probably decades, realistically. And I don't know if it did come together fast. They made an announcement fast. We knew about this, but this doesn't mean they haven't been negotiating.
Yeah, but there's usually but in those cases there's usually leaks, right? You
and there wasn't before this.
Yeah,
and it was also kind of on the down low a little bit here too. Just sort of a quick announcement, small story.
Yeah, like a Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah. And the NFL didn't make a big deal about this. But it's clearly very, very necessary. I mean, and the players union, like you said, the players union has some type that they prefer. Nobody wants people to get hurt, and we've had people get hurt because of it. So we've
had some non-contact injuries by the refs of late. I wonder if that was a tipping point.
Maybe. Yeah, God help us if the refs get hurt,
But even I think two refs one's out for the rest of the year, and one I think was out.
Yeah, that one tore a knee up or something.
Yeah, and they were just like the running back who's like just doing like just going in motion and suddenly crumples to the earth.
As an aside, the refereing in the NFL this season has been absolutely atrocious. It's a whole nother discussion.
It is really very, very bad.
Yes. So, but this is a minor story, but it's a good point. It's a good thing. And look forward. Again, this does not mean your favorite dome is going to have grass, because spoiler alert, you need sun to grow grass for the most part. So there'll be turf, and so there'll be options, and it looks like things will get better.
Well, there you go. All right, Steve, are you guys ready for the Jaden Daniels home stretch here?
Absolutely.
Can he recapture the magic?
I don't know about that, man. We'll see. It's difficult to know. We've talked about this on the Hogsty, and we'll continue to talk about this on the Hogsty. The podcast released every Thursday, and then we have all of our regular written content.
You got to feel sorry for Terry McLaurin. He gets to posthumously prove his point. But that's
he's not dead, but
no. Seasoned posthumously.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Well, which is like, did you get caught up in any of that Art Monk is Dead furor couple weeks ago?
No, I don't watch social media at all.
That caught me. I got roped up into that one. I was like, my phone kept, Art Monk is dead. Art Monk is dead. I'm like, oh my God, Art Monk is dead. And then like within 45 minutes, his wife is issuing statements. That was a very bizarre, modern times story, in and out in 4 hours.
Yeah, no, I was not aware of that at all, thankfully.
I was very upset for about 45 minutes. All right, Steve, we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.